There we go. Okay, let me back myself up for a moment here. So, um, there we are. There are our lovely faces. There's Curdy, there's myself, the co-editors in chief for the Global Neuroanatomy Network. So, we are the ones who receive all of the sort of submissions that come in terms of neuroanatomy content that we will be talking about today that are actually hosted on our website. Um, but so let me sort of back things up to 2021. We had a tweet that came out from a lovely colleague in Australia, Western Australia at the time, sort of asking everyone who was teaching neuroanatomy if we could sort of get together and just chat and discuss how we might be able to better support one another, if there's ways that we might be able to share some resources, avoid having to sort of quote unquote reinvent the wheel every single time we are having to start a new course and anything like that. And the discussion did sort of get turned around into the topic of neurophobia and this sort of concept that students, it's often described in the context of students, that students in the who are learning the neural sciences have a lot of trouble applying those sort of basic science foundations into clinical applications. I think one of the main reasons that's often cited is the fact that our nervous system, unlike many of the other systems in our body, is not something that we can physically see or manipulate quite as easily. But this idea of neurophobia often kind of translates to educators as well, especially because we've seen that many people who are having to teach neuroanatomy or any of the neuroscience associated topics may often be thrown in without quite as much background or the resources that they need to really succeed in those positions. So ultimately, this led us to apply for a grant through the American Association for Anatomy back in 2021, as I said. So our initial innovation team included 23 team members from 22 different institutions across 11 countries in 5 of the 6 populated continents. And we worked quite tirelessly over the next couple of years and eventually launched our website, the Global Neuroanatomy Network, in November 2023. So we are basically just coming up on our 1 year sort of anniversary of launching this site. And the vision for the Global Neuroanatomy Network was always sort of beyond just having a website and a repository, as I'll speak to on the next slide. But the Global Neuroanatomy Network also is now sort of has joined a complement of a couple of other sites that have been supported by American Association for Anatomy funding over the last few years. The virtual microscopy database and the virtual dissection database that are also both linked on the AAA website were funded by the same type of grant and have since basically become a worldwide resource for histology on one side and for sort of gross anatomy with a focus on dissection in terms of the VDD. So our sort of vision with the GNN was to add a neuroanatomy complement to this group of websites. But as I said, beyond that, it was not just creating a resource repository, but also creating a sort of online community of practice for neuroanatomy educators all around the world. So this sort of being a framework that's often used to describe communities of practice. So there being a particular domain that we aim to sort of center ourselves in, our intended community and what exactly that practice will look like. So as I was describing, sort of the idea that the domain is to support educators and more broadly to help to mitigate this sort of phenomenon of neurophobia that is cited so often in the literature, and help to sort of improve the learning experience and the teaching experience across the board. Our community, as I said, was initially this small innovation team, but has now shifted to ongoing recruitment of educators all around the world. I believe the next slide, I'll show you some current statistics of where we are. And then in terms of our practice, so there's this online repository that we will go through today. And then this webinar, this workshop is kind of launching the community of practice component, wherein we want to sort of build and nurture a network of peers around the globe to help to support educators at all different career stages, whether that's through the physical resources on the site. We have some workshops and webinars coming up over the next few months that some of them are actually centered around resources from the site and others around sort of topics that have come up in the literature or through discussion. At the moment, these are led by our initial or our original innovation team members, but the intention is to open the door, open the invitation to anyone who might like to lead or organize one of these sort of events, whether it's in person, online, wherever it might be, so that we can really kind of continue to foster this online community. So this is where we're at the moment. This is sort of a little graphic showing the initial distribution of our innovation team in the dark blue. There have been additional members from all of those countries as well, but we have now sort of widened our membership to 46 countries across all 6 inhabited continents. There are 366 currently registered members as of late last night, and hopefully more as we wrap up here today. We currently on our website host a complement of 40 different clinical cases and teaching resources. We'll show you how to sort of navigate those at the beginning of this presentation as well. And we are currently working on expanding our translations. So we have 15 translations currently in Spanish and Portuguese based on the expertise of our membership who are interested in helping with translation. And we are actively looking to recruit folks who would be willing to assist with translations into a variety of other languages. So at the beginning, the majority of the slides that are going to come up now are actually going to be walking us through the Global Neuroanatomy Network site. So for some of you, I appreciate that you are already members. You may have already even contributed content. So this may be old hat for some of you, but if you have never been to the Global Neuroanatomy Network site, this is the URL here at the bottom. You can hop on if you'd like. And when you reach the public homepage, you're going to see something that looks like this. You can scroll down, read a little bit more about us. And at the top here, we have a bunch of information about sort of why one might want to join, which includes information about whether you are wanting to contribute to the site or sort of use the site as an educator. A little bit about us and the whole original innovation team. So you'll see a little profile for everyone who was originally involved on there. And then up at the top here, if you are not yet a GNN member, it is all of our content is sort of on a private site that is password protected, as the intention with the Global Neuroanatomy Network is not to be exclusive and not invite students and the like to join, but specifically our goal was to create this space for educators to kind of share and support one another. And so it is for that reason that we are limiting at the moment our membership to educators. So again, it is not intended to be sort of exclusionary in any manner, just out of malice, but rather out of sort of support for our intention with the community. So if you have not yet applied for access, you can do so with the link at the top there. There we go. So up here at the top, you would hit apply for access. You'd reach a screen. This is a direct link there if you'd like to hop on. Again, any educator, be that faculty, staff, graduate teaching assistants as well, anyone who has a role in education at a recognized educational institution anywhere in the world is more than welcome to apply. Now, we do need to verify this status. So the most simple way would be to include, there's a spot where you can include a link to your faculty profile or or a website or something that sort of shows that you have that link to an educational institution. If you do not, though, we will need to find you online somewhere. And so we ask that if you know that you are not going to be easily found, you're more than welcome to send an email just to help to sort of simplify and speed up the process. We'll make sure that we can get all the information we need so that your application doesn't sit in limbo for too long. Once you have your login details, you can click on the login part of the website and you will reach our private homepage, which looks a little bit more like this and is really centered around searching content. And so you can browse the content in a variety of different ways. There's a browse all option if you don't really know what you're looking for or you just like to see what's on the site. So that's sort of just under here at the bottom. The ideal way to browse the content, if you know what you're looking for, generally speaking, is that you can browse by either structural or functional tag. So all of our resources and clinical cases are tagged with a variety of relevant tags. So if you're looking for something to do with the cranial nerves, for example, or associated with the ventricles, you are going to be able to click on that tag and it will bring up a complement of resources. You can also search by keyword. However, I should just mention that this is not a what we would call smart search. It does not automatically look for synonyms or different spellings. So it's a little bit less reliable in that the words must match something in one of the articles directly. So we certainly encourage browsing via tag or just sort of openly through the browse all content option. Once you have clicked on one of those tags, though, it will give you an option to filter the results further by additional systems, additional functional presentations, target audience, different resources, and all of that. So you'll be able to kind of narrow down your search. In our current status, with only, I guess, a total of 55 search options that will come up between the cases, the resources, and our translations, it's not too bad if you're wanting to scroll through every single option. But as our website continues to grow, this filtering option I think will become very, very helpful. So just to clarify, yes, this private homepage is only accessible once you have your login information. Again, applying for access is beyond us just needing to verify that you do have an educational position at some institution somewhere in the world. That is really all there is to it. There is no charge for joining. If you apply for membership, you open up the site and you decide it's really not for you. You do not need to use, there is no sort of data that is stored. You do not need to use the site. You do not need to opt into communication. So it is very much sort of a very low stakes low stakes choice if you'd like to just kind of browse the content and see if there's something there that might be helpful for you. Lovely. So once you get into the content, I've selected one example here of a 3D printed spinal cord model. So off to the side, you will see on the site, and I'll show you the actual site in just a moment. There is a box with all different supplementary materials where you can click on individual links to download certain files, images, PDFs, etc., and also access any external content. So things like videos or external links are also going to be included here. If you would like to save the actual resource itself, we have it set up such that if you do a sort of right click and select print, it will come out as a nicely formatted single PDF with all of the information that is on the page there, as well as at the bottom, all of the supplementary materials and clickable links. So you can kind of download the whole page in one go if you'd like. And this is just an example of sort of a recommended citation. So treating it a little bit like you would any other peer-reviewed journal. We don't have a DOI that goes along with each of these at the moment, but just something along these lines to link. So kind of similar to how you would cite any other online resource or website. Lovely. So I'm just going to quickly sort of navigate over here to our website and actually show you all in sort of live what this looks like. So this is, again, the site. You can scroll through under Join and About Us. You can see more information about how to contribute to the site, what our peer review process looks like. You can see a list of recent publications and presentations that are associated with the GNN. And again, this is the sort of apply for access page where you fill in a very, very short form, really just sort of your contact information. Once you're ready to log in, it looks like this, and you hop onto the search content site. So I'm going to go as though I'm looking for the same model that I was presenting earlier. So I've clicked on spine and spinal cord. It happens to be the first one that comes up, along with, let's see. There we go. We click in here. We can see all of the content over on the side here, and you can see that there is also, in this case, a Spanish translation available. So clicking on that will just take you over to the translated version where everything sort of pertinent has been translated into other languages as well. And again, just a simple sort of click and print will bring you to a page where you are able to download everything in a nicely formatted PDF. Now, the intention of this sort of webinar is not to just sit here and talk at you for an hour, but we wanted you to have something that you could take out of this. And the one of the main goals at the moment is to continue to expand our content on the website. And so we are accepting clinical cases as well as sort of anything else that would fall under the category of teaching resource. So I'll go through those very quickly. There is a case submission guide and a teaching resource submission guide that are linked on the side here. And they were also linked in the email that you would have received from Curdy earlier with the link to the webinar. So for clinical cases, just sort of some of the main things that we look for with clinical cases is they need to have a clear anatomical basis described within the submission. So whatever the clinical presentation is, even if it's something that is a fairly sort of textbook or typical presentation, to have a clearly explained anatomical basis behind it. So kind of focusing on the why and the how of what we're seeing and not just what. And this is how we sort of distinguish ourselves from other sites where you might be able to access resources, but unless you have all of the required sort of background knowledge or background experience working with that particular type of content, it might be challenging to implement it in a course. The idea here is that we're kind of putting it all together into one neat little package. We ask for a clear description of all relevant findings. This does not need to be a comprehensive neurological exam, physical exam, etc., but just sort of a clear summary of anything that is relevant to the case. Learning outcomes or learning objectives are encouraged for all the case submissions and the teaching resource submissions. So thinking about if you were to implement this in an educational setting, be that for residents in sort of an informal rounds scenario, or if we were putting this into a course, what is it that we would want students to get out of the experience? And with clinical cases, of course, we expect informed consent to have been sought if you are reporting on a real case. We also are happy to accept sort of fictional or fabricated cases, if you will, based on sort of cases that you have seen previously. Teaching resources are a little bit more broad. There's kind of a wide range of different things that could go under a teaching resource. It could be something that you use to guide one of your lectures or labs. So lab manuals, different types of sort of modules that people can work through. And then we also have sort of more active activities. So I showed you an example of a 3D printed model. There are others that are sort of centered around different activities. There's one where you cut a brain out of sort of paper and cardstock and build it all together to show the three-dimensional relationships between all the different subcortical structures. So the expectations here are fairly similar in that we're really looking for a detailed description, not only of what it is that you are submitting, but thinking about the personal experience of actually using it. What sort of tips and tricks would you provide to a colleague if you were giving it to them verbally? We would like to have that on the website. So again, the sort of why and how, not just what it is. So it's allowing you to include your own experience and your own expertise as part of the submission. Again, learning outcomes or learning objectives are something that we are looking for because, again, we're trying to help people understand how to implement these in an educational setting. And if you do have images or videos, you cannot accept anything that is copywritten so that you do not own the copyright to. So we strongly encourage use of either Creative Commons or sort of open source, open educational resources or content that you have created yourself and have permission to distribute. So rather than just kind of continuing to talk about this in the hypothetical, I have created a submission that I was planning to submit and just haven't gotten around to it. So I'm going to walk you through basically what the whole submission looks like. However, I'd like to actually pause for a moment. I'll have a look and see if there are any questions or anything that we can address. But I want you to have a think about your own experience, whether you are in a more sort of clinical position or a more education focused position or a more research focused position, but something that you have used in a class to assist with teaching neuroanatomy. And again, it doesn't need to be anything sort of really, really out there that you've never seen before. We have lesson plans. We have all kinds of different content on the site. So I'd just like you to think for a moment about what you might be able to submit to the site. Have a little think on it, and I'll have a look at the chat. So yes, you can absolutely have multiple authors on a submission. The contributors can absolutely be students, no problem whatsoever. As long as someone who is a member is actually submitting the content, we have absolutely no problem whatsoever with having students be authors on the submissions. Matt, I know you've been sort of monitoring through. Is there anything else that has not yet been addressed?
It looks like most of the comments are being addressed as you go here.
Brilliant. Okay. Excellent. So I'm going to go through, I picked a simple example purposefully because I don't want this to take hours and hours. But again, I'd like you to sort of think about maybe some of the ideas that have been percolating through your head, thinking about what you might be able to submit to the Global Neuroanatomy Network if you so choose. So the example that I have chosen is a teaching resource. So it falls under the teaching resource heading rather than a clinical case. Essentially anything that is not a case is a teaching resource. So anything that doesn't fall under category A is category B. Indeed, yes. Sorry, seeing the chat coming up. We'll talk about peer review just after the submission, after I go through this sort of exemplar submission. So the teaching resource that I have selected, I'm going to show it to you in real time here. It's fairly straightforward, but my students absolutely love it. So many of my students are really big Anki deck users, as I think a lot of students are. They love flashcards. They love being able to say, I've done 600 Anki cards every single day. And they think, yes, that is what is preparing me for the upcoming exam or for the upcoming sort of application of this content in a clinical setting, which I think we all know that passively flipping through flashcards is not really an actual active learning activity. So I'll go to my submit content. I'll show you as well that once you have started a submission, so I started this submission last night, you'll get the option to continue from your previous entry. So if you start submitting and you go, oh, just don't have time for this at the moment, you can save your submission. So I'll show you what this looks like. The activity that I've created is essentially sort of an active flashcard review, but it requires students to collaborate with one another and provide real-time feedback. So it's sort of inspired by the game Heads Up, which I think was kind of popularized on the Ellen DeGeneres show, but is essentially a game where you have a word that one person cannot see and others can, and they are trying to describe that term or word to the person who is the guesser without actually using the term itself. And um, other sort of limitations can be put on the communication. So, for example, I've seen this also done with, you're not allowed to use any kind of jargon or technical terminology. So, to encourage people to work with sort of layperson friendly language. There's actually a formalized game called Dr. Jargon that was is available for purchase somewhere on the internet that kind of follows that language limitation idea. But this is something that can be implemented anywhere and anywhere. Basically, I've created a randomizer wheel with over 350 different neuroanatomy terms. I'll show you what it looks like. It looks like this. So it's just a big spinning wheel. It's got hundreds of different terms that I introduce in my particular course. However, this website is fantastic. It's literally just wheel of names. You can put anything on this wheel, but you can share your wheels and someone can create a copy and edit their own. So essentially, as you click on the center, it comes up with a term. This is the term. And so the people who are describing this term need to do so without actually saying precentral gyrus. Now we could take it at a very sort of simple level and just say, well, primary motor cortex, and hopefully the person who is guessing is able to quickly localize the structure and function. Or again, you can kind of increase the level of difficulty by increasing the different language limitations. And then it kind of goes from there. So the actual site that's linked is just this. As I come back though, in my submission, so we have a variety of information that's required. The first is, as I said, searching by tag is our recommended search strategy. And so I have selected all of the different sort of structural and functional components. Essentially, for this, as I said, I have over 300 terms on here, so just about every structural region is covered. Most of the functional systems are covered as well, and this could very easily be applied for any audience whatsoever. It's very, very easily adaptable. But this is as we go through. So level of neuroanatomy content, I selected intermediate, although it is very much something that could be adapted. We ask for just an average duration. I tried my best. This is again something that could be done with all kinds of different groups and anywhere from, 5 or 10 minutes all the way up to hours as the students are using this maybe for their independent review. We do ask whether the resource is adaptable for online learning. In this case, this is actually housed online, so it's perfect for online learning. It could very easily be done over Zoom or over any other video conferencing software. Level of difficulty to implement, dead easy in this particular case. You click on the link and I've got a sort of an instruction manual that goes along with it and you're ready to go. Activity type, as you can see, this gives you kind of an idea of the breadth of different teaching resources that we have accepted with an other button here because we appreciate that this does not cover absolutely everything. So you can see models, e-modules, games, illustrations, activities for individual students, small groups, large groups, lab manuals or lab guides, lesson plans, different lesson structures, imaging, tutorials, you name it. If it's something that you have used and you think that someone else teaching neuroanatomy somewhere else in the world could benefit from, it belongs in this category. Now, does the teaching resource have learning objectives? In a perfect scenario and in a much easier to accept submission, this should always be a yes. It's not an absolute requirement, but we encourage you to put them in yourself if need be. We have some resources that are linked in the actual guides to help you. So I'm going to click on the guide in case you have not accessed it before. I saw that Curdy put them in the chat. So it looks a little bit like this. It's a checklist similar to what you might see on a journal submission page with basically everything that you need to submit and examples of what that would look like. And we can see down at the bottom also just a nice little sort of frequently asked questions section. So here, I'm not familiar with writing learning objectives or learning outcomes. We've got a link here to the Blooming Anatomy tool that was specifically created for putting together meaningful learning objectives, particularly in sort of the broad field of anatomy. So there are resources there to help you out. Right, back to my submission. So in this case, I've included my learning objectives as having students basically be able to describe and also interpret descriptions of different neuroanatomical terms. And it also, if the students are willing to actually take some time to reflect, allows them to identify their own strengths and weaknesses in terms of terminology related comprehension and understanding so that they can guide their studying and study smarter, not harder, as we often encourage our students to do. So for teaching resource instructions, again, this is where we want to see the content. We want you to tell us how you have used it, how others might be able to use it. This is where you can put your own spin on things. Again, this is not a journal submission, so we are not expecting this to be in, perfectly formulated sentences with all of the technical terms. Think about just describing this to a colleague. How would you share this in a meaningful way? So in this case, I've included instructions for kind of the original version of the game, which is best suited for small groups, an alternate version, which is my personal favorite because I love playing this with students, where one person is sort of the guesser and they have to ask yes or no questions about the thing that they cannot see that is either behind them or in front of them with the screen facing away. So I love doing this with my students where they have to basically say yes or no, and I'll sit there going, am I a nerve? Am I a nucleus? Or am I a gray matter structure in general? Am I involved in somatosensory pathways? And see how quickly you can narrow it all down. You can obviously add in a competitive element by putting on a timer and keeping score as you go. And I've also included a technology-free adaptation because with the GNN thinking about why we created it in the first place, we wanted to try to create resources that would be accessible and applicable for folks all around the world. So thinking about a scenario where you might not have access to reliable internet or devices for every single student, here's a technology-free adaptation. As we go down, we have a few categories here. Again, in all cases, you're being asked yes or no. So in this case, there's really no particular instructor preparation that is required or student preparation directly. But in there, if you felt that there was something that students or instructors should prepare prior to using this particular resource or prior to using one of the cases, you could click on these. Specific materials or software. Again, this is where I get into describing the need for a computer or device with reliable internet access. And if you're playing with a large group, access to some kind of projector or screen to do so. And then again, is there a recommended setup or room design for the learning environment? If you were telling a colleague about this particular, in this case, an activity or any other resource you might submit, what would you tell them? So I've given some suggestions for sort of medium to large groups versus smaller groups and how the room might be set up effectively based on my own experience only. This, of course, is adaptable to other learning environments. And then I included in here additional notes, so things that I think people might want to know. So as I said, under this delightful website, which I love, I use it for a lot of different things, you can click on copy this wheel and create your own copy. So now I'm currently signed into this website. You create a free account and you can go through and you can edit the terms. Whoop, there we go. Edit all of the different terms. This one has, I think, 360 at the moment. Or you can create a new wheel from scratch, and this could very easily be adapted to any other topic or different learning levels. It could be used for anything from sort of public outreach to elementary students who are in younger younger ages, or it could be used all the way up through any higher education. So that is, as I said, it's a relatively simple example, but I wanted to show you how much value you can add to something like this through the actual submission process. So with all of the different sort of descriptions of exactly how you would implement this. In terms of supplementary material, you are able to include, I'll just show you links, images, PDFs, and links to videos. Now, videos we are not able to host directly on our site. We do have some limitations. So we ask that you host it externally. We recommend using YouTube or Vimeo, or depending on the nature of what you're submitting, something where you can control access. So if it's something that you don't want to have posted publicly, it can be a private link that is just linked under here. And as well, as I said, links to external websites are also welcome. And then at the bottom, you are simply letting us know that you are sort of attesting or certifying that you are able to distribute this content. We, by default, are distributing everything under a fairly sort of open Creative Commons license, but you do have the option if in this case you have distributed it previously under a different license, it should be distributed under that same license. So you can always add in a different license if need be. And then you simply go and you hit submit. So looking at my submission here, I believe I am all ready to go. So I'm going to go ahead and hit submit. All ready to go. And there we go. So now it has gone in. It's ready to be reviewed by our peer reviewers. And that is sort of the process that I'll get to in just a moment. So this is just a quick summary of sort of all of those little bits and pieces that we needed you to include, but the submission guide also has a checklist of all of the larger sort of text boxes that are required. Um, Now you might be thinking to yourself, but why? Why would I take this time to submit a clinical case or a teaching resource to a repository like this, especially if it's something that I know I'm not going to be able to submit to a more traditional journal. It might not sort of be viewed the same way. So again, these are peer reviewed. They do go through a peer review process that I will describe very shortly, which involves, depending on the type of submission, at review in at least 2 of 3 different domains. So those being basic science, pedagogy, or clinical. So all resources go through a pedagogical review. And then the basic science and clinical science have a little bit of overlap. So clinical science, especially, or clinical, especially for the clinical cases, and the basic science, especially for the teaching resources, but they are kind of interchangeable depending on the particular scenario. But beyond that, I mean, we also have the fact that you are helping to support educators all around the world, sharing your expertise, sharing all of your different teaching approaches, and also contributing to improved experiences, not only for your fellow educators, but for learners as well, and sort of helping to push forward this fight against neurophobia and helping people to enjoy the field of neuroanatomy, hopefully as much as we all do together. So I'm going to take a quick little pause before I go through the peer review process and again just see if anyone has any questions. I know there were some that were being answered in the chat, but if anyone does have questions that they would prefer to unmute and ask verbally, please do feel free to put up your hand and I'd be happy to address those. All right. Well, as you think on that, and in interest of ensuring that we stay on schedule here, I would like to talk a little bit about the peer review process. So a little sort of look behind the scenes at what happens once you have clicked the submit button. So our peer review process, again, there are at least 2 peer reviewers for every clinical case and teaching resource that comes into the Global Neuroanatomy Network. But the peer review process, and we hope that this will encourage people to volunteer and to want to act as peer reviewers, because at the moment we are a relatively small pool of reviewers, the peer review process is much less daunting than what you might experience if you have been a reviewer for any sort of more traditional journal in the past. This does not require reading through tens and tens of pages of text and having to search through the literature and make sure that everything has the most up-to-date citations and all of those wonderful things. The peer review process is simplified into basically four categories. So I'll show you what this looks like. And the peer review is done through a very simple Google form. So rather than asking you to submit a whole report, it's just a form that each reviewer fills out. And they are basically indicating whether in each of these four domains you are meeting the expectations with the case or resource. And if there's anything that we might want to add. Generally speaking, the preference is that we are able to, if there are small changes that need to be made that we can make on our end, we will do so directly in the resource. If it is something more substantial that needs to be changed by the author or the submitter, that is when we will send it back and ask for updates. But the intention is to make both the submission process and the peer review process as streamlined and simple as possible. So the first of these little domains is content completeness. Is that a word? I think we decided completeness was a word. So whether or not there is sufficient information for the case or the teaching resource itself to stand alone. Does it have everything that you would need in order to make use of it? Are there any critical components that are missing? If no, you hop on to the next domain. If yes, there's a box where you would indicate exactly what you think is missing. And then as one of two editors in chief, we look through all of those comments and determine whether or not it is crucial that we go back to the author for any edits or whether it's something that can be addressed on our end. Two, accuracy of information. Very important. Is the content accurate? Can everyone rely on what they are seeing? Are there any errors that need to be corrected prior to publication? Are they typographical errors that we can fix in terms of sort of what's been submitted in those text boxes? Or is it something that is kind of built into, say, a link or a video that has been submitted that would need to be fixed on the author's end? Readability, clarity. Is the content presented in a way that would be easily understood? Since you get to indicate what your intended audience is, if your intended audience is medical students or residents or, higher level, and therefore it is presented in a more sort of complex manner, that's fine. But as long as the two kind of fit hand in hand, as long as it's presented in a way that would be appropriate for your intended audience. If it's a more broad audience, then you want to make sure that it is more sort of broadly usable. And is the language clear and appropriate? We sort of reserve the right that if there are any sort of unnecessary stereotypes or things that have been included in a case that should be removed so that they can be more widely used, we will make those small edits, but just ensuring that everything in the submission is clear and fits within the submission. And last but not least, which kind of goes along with the readability side, but it's the level of complexity. So if you tell us that you are submitting something that is intended to be used with medical students, and yet appears to go through sort of the foundations of what a neuron is for the majority of the activity, we might suggest an edit either in the content or simply editing the intended audience so that everything matches together. But that's all there is to the peer review process. It's a form that has just each of these different domains within it. You're clicking yes, it meets this requirement. No, but it's something small that could be fixed. Again, typographical errors or something's just in the wrong box. Or no, but it's something that would be fundamentally need to be fixed by whoever submitted the case or the resource in the first place. Are there questions? What questions do we have about the peer review process? I think I saw one that came up just toward the end here about how one might get involved as a peer reviewer. And that's an excellent transition into my next slide. So I'll just put the next slide up for a moment. Absolutely. We are are urgently looking for people to contribute as peer reviewers. You will be able to let us know which different stream or streams you are comfortable reviewing. Again, pedagogical, basic science, or clinical, depending on your expertise. Um, but yes, certainly actively recruiting. So while we're waiting to see what other questions there might be, this QR code that's on the screen right now, that will also be distributed via email after the webinar, includes a direct link to just a very short post-webinar, post-workshop survey. It's an email, it's your name, and it's just a series of check boxes as to how you foresee yourself contributing to the GNN moving forward, whether that's just becoming a member and searching for resources, or whether you would like to contribute, whether contribute actual content, contribute as a peer reviewer, or maybe, hopefully, this workshop has inspired you to think about ways that you might want to contribute to sort of the wider community of practice in organizing future workshops, future seminars, all of those wonderful options. And as I mentioned, we are also actively recruiting translators. So if you do have proficiency in any language other than English, so I know I said we have Spanish and Portuguese, but I'm sure those individuals would love some additional help as well. Please do let us know. So those are all options on the form for you. But I will leave the floor back open for questions regarding either peer review or sort of anything that has been presented at this point. This is the end of the formal content that we have prepared, but I open the floor if there are questions or just general discussion around anything that you've seen today. More than happy to address that.